When the insurgents were brought out, some dead and others wounded, the lawn in front of the engine house presented a dreadful sight. The wounded father and his son Watson were lying on the grass, presenting a gory spectacle. One of the dead was Brown's son, Oliver. Journalist, Baltimore American, 1859.
John Brown was captured only 36 hours after his war for slave liberation had begun in Harper's Ferry, Virginia.
Following the capture of Brown and his men in Brown's Fort, several are desperately wounded, most of all John Brown. They're all incarcerated in the jail in Charlestown nearby, where for several weeks they await trial.
The trial at Charlestown is highly publicized, and people cram to see if they can get a glimpse of Brown the Madman.
Brown, in fact, goes through most of the trial lying on a stretcher. Because of his wound, he still is unable to be up and around. But he's feisty enough that he can still speak eloquently from his prone position on this ersatz bed that he's been brought in on.
In the courtroom, Brown throws away the sword and takes up the power of the word. He begins to put not just slavery on trial, but also the country, the United States of America, for allowing slavery to exist. Brown becomes the preacher. He becomes the minister.
I believe that to interfere, as I have done, in behalf of God's despised poor is not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and the blood of millions in this slave country, whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I say, let it be done. John Brown, 1859.
He talks about the wrong of slavery. He talks about how much the country needs to get rid of it. He's looking way beyond that court. He's looking at the North. It's, you know, what he's saying is, I took the first step. I came down here to let them know that we're going to get rid of this thing by violence. Now it's up to you to carry it on through.
Newspapers carried the alarming news of the insurrection, and throughout the South, support for secession from the Union grew.
Virginia is arming to the teeth. More than 50,000 stands of arms are already distributed, and the demand for more daily increasing. Former President John Tyler.
The trial concludes, and Brown is told stand.
Brown would be sentenced on November 2nd, 1859, only 3 weeks after the raid had ended. He would be sentenced to hang by Judge Richard Parker, executed because he had committed treason, committed murder, and committed insurrection.
Prominent people spoke out on Brown's behalf.
History will date Virginia emancipation from Harper's Ferry. John Brown has loosened the roots of the slave system. It only breathes. It does not live hereafter. Wendell Phillips.
Brown is a new saint awaiting his martyrdom, who, if he shall suffer, will make the gallows glorious, like the cross. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
On the morning of his execution, the town of Charlestown is quiet. There is a curfew. People are expected to stay in their homes.
Soldiers had come from as far as Richmond expecting a last-minute attempt to free John Brown. They would watch as Brown left the jail.
He'll come down the steps, and the wagon is a coffin, and he will actually sit on the coffin. His elbows are bound, his back is to the driver. They will take him about a block and a half away. There's a swell where they have actually erected the gallows. It's about 1,500 militia and troops that are there to witness Brown's execution.
Among the witnesses was a professor from Virginia Military Institute, Thomas Jonathan Jackson, who history would remember as Stonewall. Unaware of his place in history, Jackson looked on as John Brown climbed the 13 steps to the gallows.
He will stand on the trap door, and his death cap is fitted, and then the signal is given. The hatchet comes down, the rope is severed, the trap door is sprung, and John Brown's body hangs between heaven and earth.
This will be a great day in our history, the date of a new revolution, quite as much as needed as the old one. Even now, as I write, they are leading old John Brown to execution in Virginia for attempting to rescue slaves. This is sowing the wind to reap the whirlwind, which will soon come. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, 1859.
Church bells tolled in the stillness of North Elba, New York, as Brown's body was carried to a simple grave.
2 years after Brown died on the gallows in an attempt to free the slaves, Union troops are marching into the South, singing John Brown's body.
John Brown, in essence, predicted the American Civil War by his pronouncements that slavery would only be abolished through bloodshed. He predicted what ultimately became this great war that resulted in the abolition of slavery.
I can't imagine that Brown himself, any of those soldiers who stood at his execution site, or Americans, had any idea of how much blood would actually be spilled in the war to come.
600,000 men and boys were alive on the day that John Brown was executed. 5 years later, they would be gone.
John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on.